Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Foreign Gems, where we're bringing you unique perspectives on career and self-development. I'm Mac,
I'm Ola.
and today we're actually doing kind of an interesting experiment. We've got the live setup over here, testing out live to see if people would join in, maybe join the conversation a little bit as well. Could be interesting for us. Maybe something we continue to do in the future as well. I'm kind of excited about it. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, I feel pretty good about it. It's an experiment. We've experimented with a lot of ideas on this, and some stuck, some we got rid of. Maybe this might be one that will stick. We'll see.
Yeah, man. I think it could be fun. I don't know. We're gonna also try and moderate at the same time. So if anybody has any questions, if we take some time to get to it, bear with us. We're still learning for sure. So Ola, what are we gonna talk about today?
Yeah, today we're talking about mental health.
Mental health. I was a bit nervous doing this episode, to be honest. I think it's like such a personal topic, and a lot of people have experience with it. I think everybody goes through a time in their life, at least, where they're thinking about their mental health, they're more aware of their mental health, and then are trying to deal with it as well, and you never really know what somebody's going through. So we want to be sensitive about this topic and treat it with respect. And so as part of that, a quick disclaimer: we're just clearly two guys on a couch who love to put on this podcast. We're not experts in this field in any way, but we just want to share our personal experiences and talk about kind of the cultural aspects of mental health, how it relates to your career, as that is the premise of our podcast, and also how it relates to self-development. And yeah, I'm excited to dive into this with you and share kind of the stuff that we found out about it.
Yeah, I mean, we are experts, but just like anyone else is an expert on mental health. Like we're all experts at our own life experiences.
Yeah. So the first kind of segment I had thought about for this podcast is for us to talk about like cultural perspectives on mental health. So I am familiar with what it's like in Tanzania and how mental health is kind of treated in Tanzania, but I'm very curious if there's like similarities or differences in the way that like you perceive mental health growing up in Nigeria. So can you tell us a little bit about kind of what your experience was with mental health, whether or not there was any stigmas or anything surrounding it, things like this?
Definitely a stigma around it in Nigeria. Growing up, I'd never seen anyone made any comment or said anything about their mental health without looking like they're a crazy person. You can't even say you're depressed. I remember there was when I used to live in like this low-cost housing estate, and then there was this man that never used to go anywhere, and people used to say he was depressed. And as a 6-7-year-old child, now knowing what I know, if someone tells me someone is depressed, I'll probably try to reach out, try to talk to them. But I started looking at the man as stay away from that man. He's a weirdo. Like no one wants to interact with them. And that was the first real experience I knew of, someone going through a mental health issue. And instead of being embraced, they were actually more alienated because of that. And also just people being having anger issues. There's a lot of schizophrenia in Nigeria, unfortunately. Those are serious mental health issues. Those are not like you're regular, you're not in a good mood or whatever. There's a lot of trauma. There's a lot of trauma. People just overreacting. I mean, I am a product of that myself. Every African household, you have parents that are just mad at you for no reason, and you don't understand why. But you get older, you understand. Oh, it's caused generational trauma and all this stuff. But I think mental health is not like. It's not something it's a taboo topic in Nigeria. As a guy, you have to be tough. You can't see a guy cry. You're made fun of. You're made fun of. With women especially, you have to be the tough guy. You have to, I never had a positive look at addressing, any mental uncomfortability. Until I reached Canada, and that's when I was like, oh, okay, it's normal to not feel okay mentally sometimes. What about you?
Tanzania, very, very similar. Almost like there's not much to add to what you just said. Is a very similar experience. Anybody who is going through a mental health crisis typically were shunned from society in a bit of a way. And I also noticed that like mental health situations, I'll call them, like this includes like all the clinical stuff, something somebody would be diagnosed for, or even like some of the quote unquote lighter stuff where it can be maybe day to day or situation to situation. All of those kind of isolated somebody. Like if somebody was going through something like that, there wasn't a lot of avenues for them to pursue a solution, especially early on. Now, I haven't lived in Tanzania in quite some time now, so I don't know if that has changed. And anybody living in Tanzania, please chime in, like let us know if things have improved there. But I always noticed that if somebody was going through some sort of mental health crisis, it would typically be accompanied by struggles in other areas in society as well. So like housing, for example, or being able to secure and keep a job. That would be usually an issue. It was also mostly like to do with like the poorer half of the country for sure was more likely to find themselves in this situation. If you were kind of around in the town, like in the town that I grew up or anything like that, usually what you would see is like people who are struggling with life in general were also struggling with like mental health issues too. That being said, I did hear the ad hoc stories, from my parents talking, sharing information with family and all of this about like maybe a particular member in society who may be like considered middle class or so, going through a crisis. A lot of this usually had to do with, especially when it came to men, to do with business. Like if something drastic happened, like say you were doing really well for a long time and then like a situation happened that completely changed that. And now suddenly you're not doing as well, you can't take care of your family as well. Those mental health crises were usually not like they were secondary. It was the secondary conversation. The first conversation was like, oh, this person just like lost their business. That's like the issue they're having. Like there was no avenues for them to go and address the other issues that are now coming up as a result of that first kind of trigger point. And that's something that I definitely noticed. And I'm curious now, that's the only piece I wanted to add. I'm very curious now, like how your view of mental health changed when you moved to the West, and like did you take it more seriously now, less seriously? Like, how did it change for your own perspective?
Yeah, it started as a joke for me. I remember one time I wasn't ready for an exam. This was in university when I moved to Newfoundland in Canada. I went to get a sick note because everyone tells you, get a sick note and you don't have to write exam. So the idea was to go and say I had flu or whatever.
Yeah.
But then when I went to the doctor's office, she made a mistake, but it actually worked out in my favor. So before asking, like what are your symptoms, first thing she was asking me is, what was the last time you've been home? And I was just like 6 months or whatever. And then she was like, okay, 17-year-old. Have you ever like left home for like an extended period of time before that? I was like, left home technically, but I was always around the family. Then she was like, oh, okay. Do you ever like miss your family? Do you talk to them? So she started asking all these leading questions. And I was like, oh, I see where this is going. So anyway, she ended up prescribing a sick note for me and said I was homesick. Like that was my sickness. I milked that for the rest of my university because I never went home, which means I was homesick the entire time. So I had the same sick note. However, then I was also taking a psychology course that semester, and then I started learning about these things, and I was like, oh wait, so this is for real. People do, these things like homesickness does affect people's mental well-being, which means it affects their physical well-being and social well-being. And yeah, then I started like, okay, so this is not actually a joke. This is like people, because coming from Africa, it was a Western problem to have mental health issues. It was like, oh, you have too much money, you don't know what to do, and there are other things to worry about. But you realize like, no, everyone has those challenges. Yeah. What about you? What was your first exposure?
My first kind of exposure was around the same time, was definitely university, because I was now around a lot more people. Like MUN, to me, I know a lot of people consider, and MUN is Memorial University, a lot of people consider that a small university in like the grander context of Canadian schools. But from my high school, like I was in a graduating class of 42. So to me, MUN is huge. Like I've never been around so many people before.
And for 120 people?
Yeah, like there was 100 and something people in just like my class, just mechanical. I think it was like 100 and something. In all of engineering, 200 and something. In all of MUN in my year, probably in a couple thousand. You know, so a lot of people, and I'm now around a lot of people, so I see a lot of other people's experiences. In high school, I didn't see this like mental health crises that much, or at least it wasn't outward. And again, that could be because of like the cultural background that I was in at that time. But when I moved to the West, people were more open about it. Like I'm going through something, or that person is going through something, and like these conversations are being had a lot more. So I was seeing it a lot more in my day-to-day life. And then I understand, like, this is something that's actually keeping somebody from being able to do something. Actually, I also want to backtrack a little bit. I did have a friend growing up who was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And that was like my most intimate relationship with like mental health before I moved to the West. And at that time, I remember I didn't really understand what it is that like someone can have something physically, clinically different to you. And so they approach situations completely different to the way I approach situations. And I was like, but why can't you just kind of see it in this way? You know, it was always like the but why kind of line of questioning. Right. And then when I moved to the West, I started to get answers to the why. Like there are things that like people are going through that you can't perceive. And you have to treat that with respect and also give them the grace and the space in order for them to deal with that sort of thing. I didn't really understand that as well until I moved to the West. So yeah, I just wanted to make that clarification. Also, I want to read to you a couple points that affect kind of like a cultural background. So they mention here family background. So that affects whether or not you can discuss mental health situations in your home. Religion is a big one. A lot of time, and I don't know if this was the same for you in Nigeria, but if something is going wrong with you, people would just say, you know, like pray about it. Yep. You know, it's a symptom of your lack of connection with, you know, higher power. Social norms, of course, I think that's most of what we talked about so far. And then traditions. So traditions for me didn't really play as much of a role. I think social norms was probably more so than. Social norms and traditions, they're very similar things, but I wonder, like, did tradition play a role in for you, like growing up in Nigeria, in the way you perceive mental health? I think you mentioned a little bit there about like how a man is supposed to be and things like this. But were there other aspects that also kind of affected your worldview at the time?
I can't say much of tradition because one, I only lived in Nigeria like for 17 years, not even. Yeah. And also when I was living there, I was not mentally like fully following the tradition. I was that kid always on the internet or reading books. I just didn't belong in the society. Yeah. So I don't know much about the tradition. But religion was one. You know, I was from a religious family, both Muslim and Christian. And my mom had this, you could not complain about anything. It was, before you even finish explaining the issue, it's like praying to God. She still did it up to like 2 years ago. Yep. Like the older I get, the more we have these conversations. And I'm like, no, like you can't just pray away everything. You need to understand why something is happening, get to the bottom of the issue, and then maybe prayer can be one of the solutions, but the solution can just be dismiss and pray to God. Yeah. And so that was definitely the biggest one that I noticed a lot. Yeah.
Okay. Skipping forward now a little bit to your experience in the West again. I want to read to you something and I want to hear your thoughts on it.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Studies have shown that depression is more common in cultures that value individualism and achievement than in collectivist cultures. And while anxiety disorders are found across all cultures, they tend to be expressed differently in different cultures. In Western cultures, anxiety is often experienced as fear or dread. In contrast, in Eastern cultures, it may be more likely to be experienced as physical symptoms, such as heart palpitations or dizziness. What are your thoughts on that, like the comparison, East and West?
I totally agree. I 1000% agree. I would not have understood that because I've always been very much a lone wolf.
Mm.
But last year, it was a rough year generally for me. And I, I was trying different things, even therapy, and nothing was working as great as until when I went to London for Christmas and I was around family. And it was like night and day. It was I didn't have to do anything different. It was just being around people who truly love you. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to be anything, but just be. I was like, oh, so like community and having your people around you adds a sense of well-being. So in that case, if I had that around me and I still wasn't okay, then of course the reason would then not be community. The reason would be physical symptoms or other things like you mentioned.
Right. Okay. So that collectivism approach had a big impact in your life.
Yeah.
Like being able to be around family, being able to be around people you felt you didn't have to prove yourself to, things like this, like that unconditional love that's there in family was very helpful to you.
Yeah, exactly. And in Nigeria, I was around my actual family and cousins. Everyone were always around, so it was like a super busy house. And coming to university, I thought I was alone, which I was, but then I have all these other students that were like my family. I always lived in apartments with like 5 other guys. We always had events, so there was always a revolving door of people. So you don't realize the effect of all those people, what they add to your well-being, until you get older. You're more isolated, and you're like, oh, these support systems were more important than I thought it was.
That resonates with me a lot, especially being around people who are your friends and things like this. My personal experience was, like, I grew up an only child, but I always had people around me a lot when I was younger. Like, I always had like really good friends. In fact, one of them just got married. Shout out Hafiz. I was just in San Francisco for his wedding. But yeah, I was always around people like that. I was always around my good friend Nico as well. Like, they became my de facto brothers. And then when I moved to university, I was just with a lot of first years. We were all kind of nervous together, going through a lot of firsts together. I always felt like I could count on them. A lot of the people on my floor in residence, for example, really good friends with them. Still friends to this day. And then when I first moved out of, not even moved out of res, but moved like, from university, like when I was done with school, and I didn't have that regular communication with my peers, I noticed that like I had a change in myself, and I struggled for a bit with it. I was just starting out my career, so I felt like I had a new arena where I had to prove myself all the time, which is going to be a nice transition to the next section. But I just started out my career. I felt like I had to prove myself a lot. I started to lose kind of touch with myself. I became more attached to my performance. I had less downtime where I was around supportive people, especially early on. That changed, of course. Like, I got a girlfriend and things like that, and these really helped. And I like made my friends and my friend groups, my adult friends, so to speak. But in that transitionary period, I felt a lot more isolated than before. So like this statement about like cultures that not necessarily, I mean, it says here value individualism, but cultures that are more centered around individualism, I feel like that isolating factor can actually have a much bigger effect on how we show up day to day than we even notice, just because we spend so much time in that culture. If there's like one big takeaway from this whole section of like culture that we're discussing, is to highlight the fact that people come from a lot of different cultural backgrounds, so we need a lot of patience with one another. Like you're saying before, we came from a place where we viewed mental health a particular way, and then you come here and then you learn like a different approach for doing these things. And so being patient with one another, whether you're or not you're the person going through like the mental health crisis and you feel like your friend is not being empathetic or they don't understand you, that's one side. But the other side too is, if you know somebody going through a crisis, showing up for them rather than holding on to your core beliefs from before, and understanding that you may not be able to fully understand what this person is going through.
Yeah.
But finding ways to be there for them as much as possible.
Three things to add before you change the thing. First of all, the disclaimer we should have put at the start. This is not, supposed to be a replacement for actual help if you're going through any crisis. I don't think we did.
Oh, we need
okay. It's never too much.
Yeah.
We're just having conversations based on our own experience, and also, every conversation that we as a human race, society, we have about this conversation helps. No one needs to be an expert. Of course, we should not be giving out false information, but any little bit of information that someone didn't know before, it helps. So we hope you can take away something from this. However, just, we are not experts at this. We'll try to link to some resources that will be helpful, and would also, hopefully in the future, have people that can contribute to these conversations and add color.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to point that out. The other thing I wanted to mention was, I don't know if you'll get to that at some point, but mental health, as you mentioned, be understanding of different people. They are on different levels. Like, you might see a 40-year-old man coming from Africa and acting in your way like a child, like emotionally, and you won't understand why a grown-ass man hasn't worked on their issues, but you don't understand that coming from a different culture, it's not something they talk about. It's something that takes a while. Like for me, it took years to understand myself, to understand my triggers, to understand my boundaries, and then I started talking to people that are much older from back home, and I realized they are not even anywhere close.
They haven't done that yet.
They haven't done that, and that's one of the advantages of being, in this part of the world. It really helps you understand that more. The other thing I wanted to mention too is mental health issues or challenges looks differently. Someone can look perfectly normal, in quote, and still be going through a lot of challenge. For me, it took last year for me to know, like, a lot of my achievements actually came from a challenge of, when growing up without my dad, I was in a way compensating for that. So like, he didn't want me. That was the thoughts in my, child self.
Yeah.
And I kept like, it was like I was trying to like show like, if I do this, if I'm top of class, if I'm this, if I'm that. And now I enjoy it for myself, but for a long while, I didn't realize that it was an automatic response to that.
Damn. Yeah, I could see how that like would make you want to tick boxes off.
Yeah.
Almost like I've got to prove myself type of thing, right? And so, do you remember when, and as much as you're comfortable saying, of course, do you remember when you made the switch and you're like, I'm doing this for me now. Like I understand that this was like a big motivator for me. I understand that as a motivator, it's been powerful and maybe even in some ways useful. But now, like, I want to do these things for me. When did that moment happen for you?
Yeah, it's funny how you said if you're comfortable sharing. That's one thing I've realized. Like, if you're always living in integrity, it doesn't matter. Like, like you can be transparent as much as possible because there's nothing to hide. Of course, there's always too much information. But when I became aware, I don't know, therapy for sure. It wasn't even like crazy thing. It was just like, I love self-improvement. One of the reasons we're doing this podcast is because we both love self-improvement. We're trying to get better. And it was to get better. It wasn't necessarily because I thought I was struggling as much. It was like, I could be even better, like, and what's this thing people are talking about? And I studied psychology and I understand the importance. So it was like, okay, let me actually put this into practice and see. And then I started learning, from, therapy, like, you seem to be doing quite a lot. Do you actually enjoy doing it, or like, why are you doing it? I was like, I do enjoy doing it. Then as soon as I said, I was like, did I actually say that right? And then I, like, you're right. Then we broke it down. Then I realized, snap, it came from some trying to prove something. And, my mom had toxic behavior in that way too. Like, write a list of what you want, and at the end of the year, you'll get it as long as top of class. It was great. It helped me achieve great things. However, it also meant like, affection felt like it came with a price.
Achievement.
Yeah, with achievement. But I realized it wasn't true. In the past few years when we've connected, I was like, like she doesn't care. She was just using that because she knows it motivates me. But she doesn't care. Like she loves you regardless. Yeah. So yeah, that was something I wanted to point out.
Okay, so I was actually gonna wrap up this section, but you've mentioned some really important points that I think warrant like a zoom in a little bit. I love it that you mentioned the relationship with parents.
Yeah.
Especially like people like us who grew up in a different place and then moved over here and then started to learn about these things, started to learn the vocabulary around them, started to learn about things like trauma and how they can affect different people. I think it's especially important if you've had that sort of enlightenment or you're on the road of that kind of enlightenment to show extra patience when it comes to your parents. Because I remember when I started to learn about mental health and started to learn about traumas and things like this, my initial instinct was like, aha, I understand why all of those things were happening. But I didn't have patience right away. I was kind of like, you see, like you were being mean or blah, blah, like that kind of thing, right?
Yep.
But like life is like a big journey, and it's a journey for everyone. So even though yes, they were the adults in the relationship, and you expect them to have things more together than maybe you do, people are learning as well. Like I'm still having conversations with both my parents as they develop and learn new things. My mom and dad, they now, you know, have much more access to like the internet and things like this. So they can, and they're self-learners. They just never had the tools to do it. And now they do. And every now and then I'm having conversations with them and they're telling me something new. It's like, I realize this about myself. And I think this also affects like our relationship and how we had a relationship. And I'm like, okay, this is something that, you know, maybe I learned when I first moved to Canada, but you know, my parents are figuring that out right now.
Right.
And now they're like receptive and open enough to have the conversations about it like more openly and discuss those relationships. And to me, it's like, man, you really need to exercise patience with people because maybe it wasn't their time to learn that thing, but maybe later on they will learn that thing and have that conversation with you. And if you want to broach that conversation, I think it's useful for you to approach it from a point of like, they don't necessarily know everything that I know right now. And maybe I need to share some resources with them or something that could help them like arrive at that discovery themselves. That part too I found was extremely useful. If anybody is like me who's you know, grew up in quote unquote East and moved to the West and learned a few things, share the resources. Don't come at the situation as like, oh, now I know more and like you're trying to win the situation or something like this. That's the wrong approach. I don't think that works very well. I think it's better for you to just like share something. It's like, I thought of you when I saw this, like read through it, watch this, like let me know what you think about it. We can have a discussion about it, that type of thing. And yeah, I've noticed like a massive change in both parents over time as they've like educated themselves more, as I've educated myself more, and now we have the common vocabulary to discuss things.
I love it, man. Context is everything, because like using Nigeria as an example, Nigeria only became independent in 1960. My mom was born like 1956 or whatever. Like, you know, she experienced a tougher,
A whole
different world than I do. And you can also be like, oh, I am this way, my siblings are this way, but you don't know what it's like to be a first child versus last child. You don't know what mental state your parents were. You don't know how they treated the child. Like everyone, you have to understand everyone's story, even people that are very close to you. You don't, you know, you might be like, my brother is always angry. I don't understand. Our parents treat us the same way. But you don't understand what happened to your brother at 3 years old that you didn't experience.
Yeah, that you weren't there around.
That you weren't there to experience. And that could have been like a domino effect that led to a bunch of things. So I'm even understanding that more as I get older.
Yeah. Man, that's a really interesting point you made. And like, as a younger sibling, you don't know what things your parents got right with you that they didn't necessarily get right before. That's really, really interesting. I'm an only child, so I didn't really have that experience, but I can see how like different children might have different relationships to their parents because they grew up in the same house, but grew up maybe very differently.
Yeah, which is also just something you pointed out as being an only child. This comes up a lot when, you know, when I was in Newfoundland, you talk about racist experience, and then someone would mention like, oh, but I have this friend, he doesn't complain about this or that. Everyone reacts to things differently. You know, it's like chemicals. Different chemicals react to in different ways. Different elements react to things in different ways. Your experience coming from Tanzania, we are both black, Africans. Your experience coming from Tanzania completely different from Nigeria.
Yeah.
Your experience as an only child completely different from the last child in the family. You know, like there's different ways that things affect people. So even when you think you understand something and you both share a similar characteristic, it doesn't mean that across the board things are affected the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. I feel like that's a nice like punctuation on the cultural background and mental health. And we mentioned this a little bit, but especially at our age, I'm sure a lot of the age group of the listeners as well, they're kind of working now, and that it takes up a big part of your day, first off, and it affects your life a lot more. And because it's such a big part of our lives, work has like a pretty big influence on our mental health. I want to read to you a stat.
Okay.
15% of working age adults were estimated to have a mental health disorder in 2019. So 15% is like close to 1 in every 6.
Okay.
Yeah. How does that, like, is that in line with what you thought, or is that more than what you thought?
If you asked me before 2020, I would have said that's bull crap. Like that's like no, everyone seems fine, everyone's always smiling.
And this was 2019, this stat, by the way.
That if they do that now, that would be closer to 70%, I'm
Right.
sure.
A lot, right?
Yeah, even if not 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's always that one weirdo that they think they're fine all the time, so maybe 90%.
Maybe 90%. Yeah.
What do you think?
When I read it, I was like 1 in 6. So I thought of like all the company sizes I've worked at. I was like, okay, a lot more people were probably going through something. Now it's like an average stat, so it doesn't necessarily mean in my individual case that was the case. But it made me think like a lot more people that I've worked with were probably going through something. And in the workplace, it may have been treated like, oh, so and so isn't pulling their weight, or so and so is like, why are they taking so much time off and all this kind of stuff, and we kind of, you know, chalk it up to their productivity rather than like maybe something else that they're going through, or maybe that the work that they're doing is affecting the rest of their like life a lot more. I know early on at work, in my early work experiences, I didn't really consider mental health at all. Honestly, it was something that was like something that I only really talked about in the context of like my friends, never in the workplace.
Right.
I never really considered that somebody else might be going through something. You could even call me inconsiderate in that case. But the older I get, the more that I have these experiences, the more I'm like, I need to be more aware of what other people might be going through.
Right.
Case in point happened to me at a previous work. I'm not going to mention the name. With the previous work friend of mine, I'm not going to mention their name either. They actually went through a crisis, and they ended up taking a little over a year off work, almost like a full sabbatical. And of course, our work was actually, it was in the West, so it was a lot more accommodating for this kind of thing, and they understood it. And to their credit, they treated it very well in terms of like discussing the situation with us and all of that. But the reason I bring that story up is because just before they had to go off a full year, there was no signs that they might have been going through something. Like they showed up, they were like the happiest person there. They would be cracking jokes all the time. They're constantly like the most helpful person there, like always kind of ready to go with you into the trenches about anything. And then one day it was suddenly like, yeah, like this person is going to take short-term leave. And yeah, that's just how it's going to be. We're not sure when they'll be back, but like, yeah, like they consider you their friend. So if you want to reach out and mention anything, they know that we're having this conversation with you. If you want to reach out and be there for this person, they welcome that. But like they need to take some time to themselves and like figure their stuff out. And that's when I started to think like, oh, like work and mental health like are a lot more related than I thought. And like we need to be just as aware as we like that ask from the previous section, like be mindful of other people. You have to do that as well in the workplace. That's when like I learned that first lesson in that.
Yeah, mental health is not like physical health where you see the signs. Like you don't see the signs, and sometimes it just creeps up on people like that. I posted it on my Instagram before, but you know, last year, objectively, anyone from the outside, best year of my life. But to me, it was not. I remember being on stage, and just 2 seconds before I went on stage, I was crying. I was crying, but then when I got on stage, to get myself out of my own slump, I had to focus on other people. I had to be outside of myself. So people, after the presentation, the feedback was, you felt like you were so connected to me, you felt like you were speaking right to me and all those things, and it was all this congrats. For me, they didn't know that they were helping me get over something in that moment. But if I never told anyone the story, they didn't know. To them it was like, this guy is successful, is this, is that, which I was, but it didn't mean that I wasn't going through something. And that also helped me learn that, I wonder how many people, that try to make people laugh and smile and all those things are going through stuff. And I started doing research, and it does happen. People like Robbie Williams, who would have thought, he was always making people laugh, the comedian. What's his name? Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's the loudest person or the clown in the room it's sometimes the saddest person in the room.
Man, that reminds me of a quote from Watchmen. You know Watchmen?
No.
It's like top 3 graphic novels of all time turned into a movie in late 2000s.
I did watch the movie, I just don't remember.
Yeah, there's a quote in there from Rorschach. He says like it's a joke, quote unquote a joke, about this guy who goes to a therapist, to a doctor. He's like, I'm really depressed. I don't really see the point in anything anymore. I'm not sure what to do about it. And then the doctor is like, oh, you should go see this clown that's in town. He's got the best jokes. He makes the crowd go wild, and he makes everybody feel better. It'll feel way better for you. And the guy is like, but doctor, I am the clown.
Oh.
Right? And so it's that really reminded me of that like quote where, yeah, the happiest person in the room, the most smiling person, the most entertaining person in the room might be really going through something at the end of the day. So you can't really take things at face value. So again, treat people with that grace, especially if they open up to you and they want to talk to you about something.
Yeah.
You should definitely have that.
Now I want to watch the movie again. Maybe at the time I wasn't receptive to the idea when I, watched the movie because I didn't understand these things. Yeah. But now I want to watch it the entire movie just to understand the context of that.
Really good. Recommend to anybody who's listening to this podcast. I think you really love it. But on a switch of note a little bit, work can also have a positive effect on your mental health. It can provide a livelihood. It can provide a sense of confidence, purpose and achievement. It can provide an opportunity for positive relationships and inclusion in a community. And it can also create a platform for structured routine. I wanted to bring those notes up because I found those as I was like clickety-clacking away. I wonder what your thoughts are on those.
1000%. I mean, I wanted to say not to use another personal experience, but that's the whole concept of this. We're going to share our stories and have other people share their own stories.
Yeah.
The same conference that I referred to, when I was asked to do it, I was not in a good place. I was just gonna say no, but I also know that I was in such a bad place that maybe this might help me. So the conference actually helped me a lot because I was like, okay, I'm gonna say yes to this. But since I've already said yes, I can't disappoint the people. So I need to get myself out of this funk and just get ready for this thing. So then I was like, first I booked 1 month off. I went to Mexico to understand, first, live life, enjoy, and communicate with people, try to get used to being uncomfortable, it's in an environment where they don't speak much English and I don't speak Spanish, so just trying to be able to communicate with people without much language, which is very good for public speaking, and just trying to be better, just trying to get out of myself, just trying to be better, and that actually helped me. Even though on stage I still struggled a little bit, I think without having that forcing function, it would have been way worse. So work in that case helped me, and also all the projects and everything I was doing. It was like there was just no time to focus on this thing. The thing with, I think, there are different mental health challenges, but sometimes when you're going through like a loop of thinking of what could I have, should have, the best way, is to distract yourself productively, because reflection is good, but to a certain level, you need to stop reflecting and just move on. And work forces you to move on because you have a commitment to other people. What about you?
That commitment to other people is something that resonates with me. I think when I'm working collectively on a project with other people, this podcast is actually an example of that. Like maybe sometimes I'm not in the space to do a recording or something like this, but we've made a commitment to each other to push these episodes out on a particular schedule. Like maybe I show up and I start, and then we have a conversation and we see where it goes, and then I know at the end of it I always feel glad that I did it. And so to me, that commitment to other people makes me able to take myself out of the equation a little bit more. And I think that's, at least for me, like my experience with mental health, whenever I'm going through something, usually it's because I've been spending a little bit too much time just within. Maybe just like doing a little bit too much self-reflection, or spending a little bit too much time like self-criticizing or whatever it may be. But then whenever I'm working on something external, my focus leaves from inside to outside and to building something. And whenever a project can take my attention in that way, it alleviates the other kind of situation that I'm going through. So 100% agreed with that commitment to other people. But I also agree with some of the points that they made here, like being able to provide a livelihood, for example. That is really, really important to me. And it's a powerful concept, because I feel like I can take care of myself, almost to excess, that I can take care of other people as well. I get a sense of confidence whenever we finish a project, or I do like a part that I'm very proud of, or even when I'm getting like external, what's the word I'm looking for here? Validation, I guess is the word. That you did great work here.
Intent, your comment, everyone.
Yeah. Drop a comment,
drop a comment. Yeah, feedback.
Those things can like be boosts as well. Of course, there's like it's a double-edged sword. When you're not getting those things, they can affect you in the negative way.
Yep.
But like on the positive note, it can be incredibly helpful for you to have other things that are affecting kind of like your view of yourself, and in turn your view of the external world.
Yeah. This is all the same thing I resonate with. If the layoffs would have been tougher on both of us without a pod, probably the podcast, gave us meaning, which is something else work gives you.
Yeah.
Work gives people meaning. I think a lot of people, you'll find people who have worked their entire life. They made so much money that they can stop working at any time, but they still show up to work. It's because it provides them. It's a vehicle for meaning for people.
Yeah.
So I think that's something people should, when they look at workaholics, always, don't just look at someone being a workaholic. Try to understand, the bigger picture of, what might they be going through, what might they be trying to avoid, what, do they have other sources of meanings in their life, or this is the only meaning they have. My mom is an example. Years ago, she has this shop that she goes to, and at some point it wasn't making as much sales, but she was still going. And it was like frustrating with my siblings and I, like, why is she wasting money to go to these things? And I was like mad at her, but I was always like the diplomat in the family, so I didn't really say anything. But my siblings, like, they all say something, I'm just like listening. Then I went home, and I got to talk to her face to face, and I was like, okay, so, like, woman, like,
what's going on?
Why are you going to this thing? And then she said, what else do you want me to do? And I was just like, that's true. What else do I want her to do? She's retired, like, her actual stuff. So I was like, oh, this is a vehicle for meaning for her. So I was like, okay, you know what? I don't care.
Do what it takes.
Do whatever it takes. I support it. And I never questioned it after that again. And, it allowed me to zoom out and start looking at other people. Like, when they do something that doesn't make sense to me, let them do it. Like, it provides them meaning. We talked about, we're not going to dive into religion and stuff in this podcast, but we talked about off record, our opinions and all those things. Even if I don't necessarily agree with someone, I would never tell them not to do something as long as it provides them meaning, and which is very important for mental health.
Yeah, another kind of cultural aspect maybe that can serve as an anchor for people is having that structured routine. And also religion provides like community and things like this as well beyond. So like there's positive notes for sure that help with people's general mental health, feeling that they belong to a collective, feeling like they have places where they can go and trust the people who are there.
Yeah.
It's super important.
Yeah, that touched on the community aspect we talked about earlier on.
Yeah.
And also we talk about accountability or, external aspect.
Yeah.
That's what religion is for, You can feel mad, you can feel like you want to destroy the world, but you're accountable to your God, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And, it gives you that sense of connection to something outside of yourself. And that's something we should also point out. Like, always, when you're feeling small, connect to something bigger than you.
I want to ask a question, which is like a slight shift in gear, but still to do with career. In the workplaces that you've been at so far, how have they treated the subject of mental health? Did you feel like there was resources for you to turn to if you felt like you were going through something? Did you see your peers maybe use some of those resources, or you yourself use those resources? Were they enough? Was it treated seriously, or was it treated like another checkbox?
Yeah, no, I'll give them a shout out for this for sure. Mars, at least the first version when I joined, best place in the world I've ever seen that caters to that. Like the CEO, Sarah Bird, was she cares about that kind of stuff. Like, she's kind of person that comes she was based in Seattle. She come to Vancouver, and then she's like, oh, on Thursday we're all painting our nails, and then like literally on Thursday you're all having like people having cocktails and then painting nails. We're talking about dating profiles and all this stuff. Like, it was very, it made you understand that there's more to work, and which actually didn't make you slack.
Yeah.
It makes you want to like go to war for this person. Like, no, we have to win. We have to be the best we can. So she definitely was like huge on that. I think the Seattle office, they had like a wellness room where you can nap if you need to, meditate, whatever you need to do. We used to have like a lot of socials that were catered to with stuff like that. We had a yoga instructor that used to come in. We had a paint event, just painting. Even some of the educational materials, coaching, both in terms of professionally and also like therapists almost. They catered to a lot of that, which made me also outside of work want to get better at that.
I love it.
If in the future, that's definitely a model that I will follow, and also it's part of what I will be looking at if I will join another company.
Okay, so that's actually the thing I was going to shout out there, which is for anybody listening who is thinking about creating a company, or for anybody listening who is a part of a company and is saying, oh, maybe some of this is lacking. Starting with leadership and having leadership lead by example is huge, because it actually makes it okay for everybody else. Like, if there's a small part, like maybe say it's like the HR or like the people group is really pushing mental health, that can feel a little bit more like a checkbox, like, oh, like we have to do this in order to ensure people feel like the company cares about this thing. But when it comes directly from the leadership positions, like executive roles, things like that, and they're like very clearly showing the importance of mental health and actually like walking the talk themselves, saying, oh, you know what, today I had to take the day, I was going through something, I needed to focus on something else, I took like a me day, I went to a spa or something like that, and they shared that story. It makes it okay for other people to also deal with their situations in maybe a similar way or in other ways that they know works for them. But when somebody is like in a leadership position but they never show that side of themselves, it also can feel like from the employee side that maybe it's not okay to cater to your needs in that way. So I've always appreciated it when leadership leads by example. I don't necessarily always follow exactly what they do to deal, but I know that it's okay for me to do whatever it takes for me to deal. And then I go ahead and do that.
Yeah, one of my managers used to say, Ola, remember, we are not curing cancer. Like, it's okay. If you need a day off, take a day off. And I always remember that.
Okay. I think this brings us to a nice transition to mental health and personal development. So like we've talked about, people leading by example, doing the things that they need to. You shared a great story about your CEO at Moz and how she thought it was a good way of dealing with mental health. Um, what about when it comes to like your own personal development or your own personal ways of dealing with particular mental health crises? Do you want to share some of the kind of things that you've learned that have helped you kind of find yourself again when you feel a little lost?
Oh yeah, it's the things that they tell an African man not to do. Grow up and be a man. I do the opposite. So grow up, which means I connect with my inner child. I do the things my inner child wants to do. I will elaborate on that in a moment. And then the be a man, I do more feminine, in quotes, more feminine things.
Yeah.
So the grow up part is, like last week that was happening. I was just feeling very uneasy. I was like, what's going on? I don't feel like myself. And I was like, then I calmed down. I was like, okay, I know that it's my inner child. It's the little kid screaming. What does he want right now? Oh, you want to play video games? Okay, cool. Let's go play video games. Then I just turned on my PlayStation, played for an hour, and I was good. And I came back to work. And to be honest, in the last few days has been like one of my most creative all year. And that was from listening to what that kid wanted. And also, yeah, the feminine stuff. Like I take bubble baths. I don't know, listen to freaking Celine Dion. Like I don't.
Self-care.
Yeah, self-care. Things that are not considered manly. This weird social construct. Just things to just get in touch with yourself. Get in touch with whatever your body needs. You need a stretch. You need to talk to your mom. You need to talk to a friend. Just do what you need to do for yourself. Only you know what you need for yourself. What works for me might not work for you. What worked for me yesterday might not work for me today.
Yep.
Just there's no rules to it, at least for me.
Yeah, I love it. So what I heard most there was listen to yourself and don't be afraid to give yourself what you want or you need in order to take that break.
Don't judge yourself too.
Don't judge yourself. When we talk about these personal development things, something that I think we actually do a decent job of it, but maybe we could do even better, is showing a little bit of balance when it comes to personal development. Like showing up every single day, trying to be better than yesterday, being your best, making sure that absolutely every hour of the day is as productive as possible. All of those things have a toll, and it's okay to like let go every now and then. Exercising balance is like the key thing that you actually need to do. I know like it's very difficult when we have a podcast that's very focused on topics that are like self-development for sure, for us to introduce the balancing side of things, but nobody's perfect. Like we talk about a lot of concepts, we don't put them into practice 100% of every single day. Some days you need to take that time. I don't know, for me a lot of the time it's just to go to the beach and read, just like take some time off.
I used to do that a lot when I lived downtown.
Guitar for me, it's like meditative.
Ooh, harmonica. Oh, you never sing that, right? I just brought that out because I was using that this week. Harmonica, yeah.
You started playing the harmonica.
Music, yeah.
Music in general is a way to kind of like channel your thoughts into a different direction. That's one of the biggest ways I take breaks throughout the day. I find like if I'm kind of like circling and I'm not making much progress in whatever I'm working on, I go and I just do like a repetitive task on guitar or something like that. You mentioned PlayStation. That's one of my favorite ways as well. I play first-person shooters. They're very fast-paced, so like my mind becomes very like focused on that and what's happening like in front of me, which then takes away from kind of like some of the circling thoughts that can, send you down in a bit of a spiral. I want to read you a quote. You ready?
Yeah.
We're all works in progress, and it takes effort and dedication to grow and evolve in a positive direction. Fortunately, there's never a bad time to set new goals for yourself, and it's never too late to pick up a habit that can improve your well-being for the rest of your life. Whether you're dealing with stress, working through relationship struggles, or simply trying to change your life in small ways, there are many strategies available that will help you be the best version of yourself. But it's important to have balance. I love the idea of maximizing myself, doing something every day that inherently assumes that you're not quite there yet, so it gives you that challenge. But it's just as good to do the things that confirm for you that you are good the way that you are. You choose to be better. It's not like there's something wrong with you because of where you are right now. And I think that's kind of like the big spiraling thing that needs to be like balanced out when it comes to self-improvement. self-improvement inherently almost suggests that you are not quite there yet. The idea of I need to do self-improvement means that you're not happy with where you are, but you need to learn to hold this duality in your mind, something that I'm working on as well, like every day. Hold the duality of I want to do a little bit better than I did yesterday, but I love myself, I love where I'm at, I'm proud of everything that I've achieved so far. I'm okay to take a break, I'm okay to look at like my creative endeavors, for example. I'm okay to switch that side of my brain off for a while if I need to take that break.
I agree with everything. I'm thinking of it like I'm
keep
taking
going.
it seriously, and I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
I don't know who said it, but someone mentioned, and I'm not paraphrasing them, but my takeaway from the definition of success is progression in an activity of your own choosing, and progression implies you're not perfect. As long as you're just getting better than you were yesterday in something you decided for yourself that wasn't forced upon you. That's success in its own way.
Yeah, I love that. It actually reminds me of something I was talking about with a really good friend of mine, actually. So we were discussing, actually this is more so to do with career. So she was telling me that she's having a bit of a struggle when it comes to her career. She's like on a new project. She doesn't feel very confident in it yet. And like all of these things are kind of weighing in on her, and she's spending a lot of time working on it. And then we had a bit of a discussion back and forth, because I actually let him know that I was about to record this podcast and that I was like looking into it. And one of the really powerful ideas that we came to was this idea of creating a new game and finding a way to win at that game. The game can be anything. So I've mentioned a couple games. I've mentioned a literal video game. I've mentioned like guitar. Guitar could be considered a game. Or like exercise is a game. So these are things that you can also improve and like get wins at, and those wins can what's the word I'm looking for here? Redefine yourself to yourself. So when you're always in a game where you feel like you're losing, so for example you're in a new project and you feel like you're not performing as well as you're used to, it's starting to get down on you, but that's all you're spending your time on, it's very easy to start spiraling and thinking negatively about yourself. But if you allow yourself to play other games as well, small things here and there, maybe big things, maybe you have a completely different endeavor to your career that you're really interested in, and you're seeing wins in that, it balances those two out, and it reassigns that confidence to you. Like, wait a minute, I can do things, I can achieve things, I can go for things, and just because I'm quote unquote losing at this game or not doing as well, not winning at this game yet, the fact that I can win at other games reminds you that it's possible to go win at that, and then you show up as a different person for the original game that was an issue.
Oh damn. Two thoughts on that.
Yeah.
First of all, that's like in computer science, it's recursion. If you can't solve the problem, you can solve a smaller problem that then solves the problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
I wish I knew that concept when I was actually taking the course. But now I get it. But what I was saying though is I have come across that a few times before. I use that in the context of confidence. When I'm feeling low on confidence, I go find something I'm good at. For me, before it used to be like FIFA, I was like really good at competitive FIFA. So if I'm like doing my assignments in college and I was struggling and it's not working, I just go online, kick some asses, and then come back to the assignment with this new confidence that, I'm good at this, I'll come back to this. And that's why I have side projects. That literally is the reason I have side projects. I always tell my coworkers, because they're like, you're always so positive at work, you're always so motivated and all these things. I was like, yeah, because I'm not like competing with y'all. Like, I don't care if I win in this, because I'm already like winning.
I know I can win
in my other stuff. I was like, I didn't get a pay rise this time around, but my project is making this other stuff. Like I create other games for myself. I learned that one. I don't know where, or maybe I stumbled upon it, but that definitely is something that I've been using as a cheat code.
Yeah, it's a huge one. And like yourself, I've been doing it for a while, but I'd never put it quite into words. But like now that I know it, I feel like it's something that I can quickly remind myself, like, oh, you feel like you're not really
The live
doing
video
as well
ended.
here? Say what?
The live video ended.
Oh,
yeah, I've told you that
time.
part.
So yeah, it's something like this idea of playing a new game is something that I wasn't like acutely aware of that I was doing, But now that I have the vocabulary to go and know it, and like know that, oh, you're losing at this game, you need to go play another game. I feel like it's gonna be another tool in my toolbox for sure for managing my mental health. So
Yeah.
if I feel like I'm a bit of a failure in this particular situation, go play something else that reminds you, you've got it, and you just need to figure it out for this other thing, and it'll be okay.
Even not even across fields or projects too. Within a project, you can do that too. Even with like this podcast, that's why it always seems like I would tell you like, oh, Mac, I did this random stuff. I did this stuff. Is when I'm struggling to, like, I can't come up with an headline or something. I just go work on thumbnail or something else that might in that moment come easier.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, so that's another actionable takeaway. Something that you can maybe try and implement in your own life is find a new game, find another game within the game that you're playing, and shift your attention to that, and kind of, like redefine your confidence for yourself. And now I think we've segued nicely into kind of resources and things like this. So I wanted to first shout out a couple places where you can find resources for mental health. I was looking into this and I realized I don't actually know where I would go for sure. The one thing that you always hear about, of course, and especially in the podcast world, is therapy. Yeah. Oh, by the way, this episode is sponsored by... just joking, we're not sponsored by anyone. But I bet you knew who I was going to go finish
Insert ad here.
But
int.
I bet you knew where I was going to go with that. You probably even finished it in your head. But yeah, so there's that resource. You can always go to that. But there's other official resources as well. So I found like a bunch of government websites. So for anybody living in Canada, I'm going to put the links to that in the description of this episode. And they can point you in the right direction for the type of kind of mental health help that you are looking for. There's also the Canadian Mental Health Association. They also have like a ton of resources there. I will also link to that. Of course, the jokes that we were making earlier were to do with therapy and therapists. Ola talked about, seeing one before was very helpful to kind of understand himself, and it can be like a very useful thing for you. For myself, I had a life coach before. We didn't actually get into that story. There was never really a good time to talk about it, but they basically did therapy for me. They acted as like a third-party observant person. It's like
sample everything professional.
Yeah, and so like for me, it was like the career context was a big part of the discussion, but the questions that were being asked were existential. They were to do with everything, and so getting a good grip on that, understanding myself better, helped me make a few major decisions in my life actually at that time. Maybe someday I'll tell that story as well. Friends and family. Sometimes you just need the solace of community. We've talked about that at depth, and when we talked about like the cultural kind of background of it. Religion and your church, whatever you affiliate with, that's a place that can be a resource for you. Of course, they're not necessarily licensed professionals, so use that one with your own discretion. But I do know that has been very helpful. I also wanted to share a couple of podcasts that I asked, and Chriselle actually shared these with me. This is what she likes to listen to. How to Be a Better Human. It's one podcast. Okay. I don't know if you've heard that one.
I might have.
The Psychology of Your 20s.
No, I haven't heard that one.
And 10% Happier.
10% that. Yeah. I definitely heard that one.
Yeah. I haven't listened to any of these, but they've all been added to my list. And so sometimes it can help to just kind of hear other professionals talk about situations. Like I said, we're kind of broaching the surface of the subject, so maybe some of these will go even more in depth, and you might find some episodes that resonate with you. That's just a few recommendations that we have for you. I'm going to link to everything that I've mentioned in the description so that you can kind of check that out at your own leisure.
Yeah, some of the bigger podcasts as well, I think they help, like Diary of a CEO, when they bring in successful people sharing their, intimate stories. Yeah. That helps you understand that everyone go through this. It's not just, limited to a few people.
Exactly. It doesn't have to, and you don't have to get all your resources for one place, and you don't even have to take everything one particular person says. Find what works for you. Yeah. And kind of double down on that. So in conclusion, let's bridge the divide a little bit here. Many factors affect someone's mental health, and how they respond or navigate their mental health is largely a factor of their nurturing environment. We've mentioned that it's important to show kind of like empathy and understanding when it comes to that. Understand that people don't come from the same background as you. They might see things differently. They might be going through things, and the way they deal with those things might be different to you. And there's also many ways to manage your mental health. We talked about a few that work for us personally. This is a very personal answer. We've said a couple things that might work, but there's no better way than actually trying these out for yourself. Find what works for you and make a habit of being in tune with that. And mental health, while being taboo, is actually much easier to deal with when having open dialogue. This episode, for example, has just made mine and Ola's relationship a little bit better, because now we understand each other. We understand the things that kind of work for ourselves.
Yeah.
We understand the motivations behind some of the actions that we might take. And while mental health is quite a taboo topic, it can actually be a lot easier to deal with when you have open dialogues about it. For example, myself, Ola, our relationship has just been deepened by having this conversation with one another. We understand each other's motivations a lot more. We understand the reasoning behind each other's actions a lot more. And now I understand Ola's background a little bit better. And having all of this just allows us to have a better relationship with one another, to openly discuss these topics. And I encourage all of you to do the same with the people that are around you. Try and open up the conversation. Of course, don't try and force these things like we kind of were talking about with like the parent situation. Sometimes it takes time, for you to build a relationship where that's more of an open dialogue. But I highly encourage everybody to kind of work at it.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said.
And that was our episode on mental health.
Yeah, we shared our personal and diverse perspectives on this very, self and career topic.
Take care of yourselves out there, and we'll see you in the next episode.